All right, learning plan 5 is going to be about politics and collective bargaining, unions for another word. So we're going to talk first about political action in nursing, and like economics, like law, we're not trying to teach you to become politicians, but you do need to understand how politics is hugely affecting nursing. When I talked about the politicians who wanted to make mandatory vaccinations, flu vaccinations, illegal, that's political action hitting nurses. And if we don't understand how it works, it's going to be very hard for us to do our jobs, and to do our jobs well as everything around us changes. So we're going to talk about the definition of politics and political involvement. We're going to talk about why you should get involved in somewhere. Some strategies that need to be done to help change laws. Some different types of power, and this is a very important concept. We're going to talk about political action committees and their use and misuse in government, and then just some selected issues that affect nurses. So really, what is politics? Now, remember, economics is the process of allocating scarce resource, right? Economics is the process of allocating scarce resources. Politics is the influence or influencing the allocation of scarce resources. So it's tightly connected with economics. But politics is about the influence. That's the important part. When nurses use politics, we're able to nurse smarter instead of nurse harder. We're able to marshal larger numbers, bigger voices, have more say in what goes on. One nurse who complains about the care is one nurse. 100 nurses who complain about something will be heard. And political skills help the nurse identify resources, gain access to those resources, and overcome obstacles. How? Again, because when you use politics correctly, you are creating influence. Influence gets things done, but it takes more than one person. And you have to have some political savvy. What do I mean by savvy? Savvy is an understanding. So you need to be able to analyze an issue. Now, again, let's look at the issue of mandatory flu vaccinations. I think everybody in the room was more than willing to get the flu vaccination, even if you didn't want to. What's the issue of it? Well, the issue comes down to personal choice and effectiveness. And where does personal choice no longer become an issue? That's where nurses need their political influence, political power, to make sure that legislatures understand that they might be politicians, but they're not nurses. If you have good political savvy, you can also find a resolution in clear and concise terms. Again, we can gripe about that politician, and we will, but we'd be better off organizing, getting the word out, teaching people, teaching influencers, teaching people in power how important vaccinations are. That's how we can find a resolution. We need to participate in a constructive way. So again, we can form a group or join a group. We can financially support a group that might be supporting our cause. We need to voice our opinion. And there are those of you out there that have no problem stating your opinion, and there are some of you in the room that are very quiet. That's okay. We are all different people. But when you have a case, an issue that is really important to you, you need to say something about it. You need to make your voice known, because you don't know if your voice might be the one that triggers someone else to say, me too, me too, me too. And all of a sudden, everybody around you is agreeing with you. And now you've gone from your voice to many voices, and many voices get heard. And we need to be able to use our power bases. What do I mean by power bases? Well, a power base is simply that. It's our source of authority, our source of influence, our power. And we all have power. Students have power, believe it or not. Not in every situation, but in some situations where you might not realize it. So let's look at power. There are 5 laws of where power comes from. And these are nice to know, but not crucial. But you should understand that number 1, that's the most important power. Power fills any vacuum. If someone were to, if your manager suddenly got fired or resigned suddenly, there'd be a vacuum. Someone would step up and fill that void. So power always fills a vacuum. And it's filled with somebody who has power. Generally, if suddenly there is a vacancy, a sudden, unexpected vacancy, it will not be filled by someone who has no authority, no belief that they have authority, no confidence. It will be filled by someone who believes in themselves, who thinks they have the authority, who believes in their confidence. Power fills a vacuum. Power is also very personal. When you have authority, especially when it's new, it can become very personal, very much who you are. That's much like it's common when you're at a social event, ice breaking, and the question is, so what do you do for a living? What we're asking is, what's your source of power? Well, I'm a nurse. So that's very personal to me. It's based on a series of ideas and philosophies. It's exercised through, depending on the institution. And power always gets confronted by responsibility. If you have power, you also have responsibility. And sometimes people don't realize that with power comes responsibility. And that's when problems can happen. But more importantly, there are ways that you as students can gain power. And these are not the 5 laws. These are just 5 ways of gaining power. One is the reward power. That's pretty simple. Your boss has reward power. I have reward power. Your boss pays you or can give you a raise. I give you grades. That's a reward power. Kayla last week talked about when she would receive that coupon from her HMO, a coupon for diapers. That's a reward power for showing up and doing what they want her to do. So reward power is very, very strong. People do a lot of things for reward power. Coercive power is the opposite. Coercive power is taking away. Parents use coercive power when they threaten with a grounding for a child who misbehaves. Bosses can use coercive power when they say, I'm not going to give you time off unless you do X, Y, Z. Coercive power is essentially negative, but it is a legitimate power, even if it is negative. It needs to be used carefully. Coercive power can be very corrosive to the people that it's being applied to and everyone around them. You don't want to work with somebody who's constantly threatening you with consequences. You'd rather probably have somebody who is rewarding you for positive performances and using the coercive power only as a last resort. Then there's legitimate power. Legitimate power comes from a position. It is appointed to you. Teachers have legitimate powers. Parents, managers, police officers. These are all excuse me, sources of legitimate power. It is power based in a title. So as a teacher, I have a legitimate power. But if I'm in a meeting with the college president, I don't have legitimate power, or not nearly as much. Referent or mentor power is another one. And this is sort of like the power that rubs off. So if you're good friends with the unit manager and everyone knows it, you will have referent power. You will have power that refers from the unit manager to you. It's not really yours, but you're like in its radiance. So we could look at this referent power or mentor power as emanating from someone else, a light bulb that emanates from them, and you are in the light. It's not a very powerful power, but it is power. You maybe seen people that have used their referent power by knowing somebody, and they'll drop their names. Well, so-and-so said. That's referent power. And if you've been around somebody like that, you know that it's not always well received, is it? And then you have expert or informational power. And this is what students have in the clinical site. Believe it or not, you have expert power when you're at the clinical site. You've been newly taught all this information. You are full to the brim with the proper techniques, the new medicines, the new best practices. And if you look around you, have you seen nurses that are performing not as they should? Have you ever had a nurse come up to you and say, what's this drug for? I've never seen this before. Or how do you flush that? Or whatever. It happens. Students have expert or informational power. It is possible to have more than one power at the same time. A manager can have reward power and coercive power. A manager might have expert power, or maybe not. We talked about that too last week when we talked about BSNs and MSNs not necessarily having that much more skill than you as an ADN. It could be that you as a new grad ADN have more expert power than your clinical nurse educator. It's possible. So those are the 5 powers: reward, coercive, legitimate, referent or mentor, and expert or informational. We all have the various powers in different roles in their lives. We just have to remember which power to use in which role. Come on back for part 2. We're going to talk networks and coalitions.